The year is 1869. Your itchy trigger finger is throbbing because you spent all morning beating the crap out of prairie dogs. You've just hit the biggest gold mine of your life. You found a shiny new transcontinental railroad track to stare at for hours. What? Oh, I'm sorry, you can't actually do anything here. This whole town is just a monument to nothing. How thrilling. Welcome to the Wild West. It's time to grab your six-gun and saddle up for a rooting tootin' good time. Just kidding. Grab a shovel instead because your back is about to hurt for the next 3 years. Whoopie-doo. The Wild West is full of opportunities to get yourself killed in new and exciting ways. How about spending your days staring at rocks or getting chased by mangy dogs that would rather eat you than your mule? And nights listening to crickets and praying you don't die of a mysterious illness. Yeehaw. If you somehow manage to survive the trip west, you'll need a job. Don't worry, there's plenty of work in these parts. Why don't you try being a miner? Sure, the caves are crawling with deadly critters and the air is thick with enough dust to kill a small animal. But have you considered how dark those caves are? You might go blind. How exhilarating, or you could be a cowboy. Cowboys work long, hard hours and frequently die. From snake bites? But that's okay because when they're not dying from snake bites, they're having a great time. That's right. When they're not dying, cowboys are herding cattle across the dusty plains. Sounds fun, doesn't it? Just watch out for stampedes. And later, when you're not busy dodging angry bovine projectiles, you can sleep under the stars while a chorus of nocturnal insects serenades you. Isn't nature grand? But what if you're more of a city boy? Well, why don't you try working as an outlaw? That way you can live in town and hang out in saloons? Yeah, it's dangerous work, but someone has to do it. Plus, all the cool kids are doing it. Yep, that's right. Every single person you meet in the Wild West wants to be an outlaw. Well, except the people who aren't alive anymore because they got robbed by those same outlaws. Don't worry, though, because as a lowly saloon worker, you'll get to clean up after all those exciting shootouts. What a thrill, and don't forget to bring plenty of underwear. With all the chamber pots in the saloon, you're gonna need it. If you think that sounds gross, wait till you hear about the outhouses. They're basically just holes dug in the ground. In fact, it's so bad in some places they have to pass laws requiring people to carry their own outhouses around with them. It's called a necessary evil. And by necessary evil, I mean a big pile of crap behind a tree. Don't worry, though. It's a badge of honor to be the first person to use that particular tree. The second person gets the privilege of using the small pile on the left. And the third person gets the large pile on the right. The fourth person has to find a new tree. Now, all this might sound like fun, but unless you're a fan of typhoid fever and cholera, you're gonna want to wash your hands regularly. Unfortunately, this means you'll have to leave town. Venture into the wild unknown and find a river or stream without dead bodies in it. And even then, you're still probably gonna contract a disease and die. Congratulations. It's not all bad news, though. There is one upside to living in the Wild West. You'll never be bored. There's always something to do, like watching people get punched in the gut. So you've decided to head west? Maybe you heard tales of gold, freedom, or wide-open spaces where a man could make his name. What they didn't tell you is you're about to be dehydrated, robbed, and possibly eaten by wolves. Welcome to the Wild West, where your life expectancy is one bar fight. It's the 1860s. America is expanding like a rash. Railroads are crawling across the land, and hopeful fools like you are piling into wagons, convinced this is their big break. Spoiler, it's not. On your way westward, you'll cross deserts, mountains, and rivers, and probably diarrhea. Jobs? Oh, there's plenty. You could be a miner, enjoy suffocating in caves. A cowboy, spend your days sunburned and your nights sleeping with scorpions. Or maybe an outlaw. It pays well until someone puts a bullet between your eyes. Or you could be that guy sweeping the saloon floor after every bloody gunfight. Everyone's armed, drunk, and angry. There's no Wi-Fi, no plumbing, and bathing. Ha! You'll all be lucky if you wash your face once a month, assuming it's still attached. And don't trust anyone. That friendly stranger offering you a drink? He's probably about to rob you. Or worse, ask you to join a gold mining expedition. Bottom line, the Wild West isn't romantic. It's a dusty chaos simulator with dysentery DLC, but hey, at least the sunsets are pretty. Out here, the only rule is there are no rules. Well, except for this one. Beans. You will eat beans every day for the rest of your life. At least that was the rule in the book I was reading. The reality is, if you want to survive in the wild, whether for a day or a decade, it's less about being Rambo and more about being a bean burrito. I mean, think about it. What are the three most dangerous things out there? It's water, bullets, and your own cooking. All the other stuff, the weather, predators, hypothermia, they kill you because you didn't bring enough beans. I recently spent some time at a survivalist boot camp where the instructors were ex-Special Forces operators who had written a book about surviving in the wilderness. They taught us a lot of useful stuff like how to identify edible plants and how to build a shelter. But most of what they taught us came down to beans. They talked about how important it is to have a reliable source of protein and fiber. And yeah, sure, they mentioned water and weapons too, but mostly beans. So let's talk about those because we all know how important they are. Okay, first things first, don't drink anything that's moving. That means no rivers, streams, ponds, or lakes. Also, don't drink anything that isn't moving. That means no rain, snow, or ice. The only exception is dew. If you find yourself in an area with lots of dew, you're in luck, because that means there's probably water nearby. Just follow the dewdrops back to its source. In our case, it was a stream which we immediately boiled because you should never drink untreated water. Bring a filter if you want to save yourself some time, but boiling is always the safest option. To be honest, I haven't seen anyone die from dysentery, cholera, or typhoid fever, but I have seen people die from bad cases of diarrhea. No one wants to see that. Also, watch out for mirages. This one got us good. We saw what looked like a lake full of fresh drinking water, but it ended up being a hallucination caused by dehydration. And then we kept walking until we found an actual water source. Okay, now let's talk about food because eating is a problem when you're out there. Most of the food you find out there is either poisonous or just really, really gross. That's why you should always bring a month's worth of food with you unless you want to eat roadkill. For the sake of your stomach, try to avoid eating anything that has been sitting out in the sun for more than a few days. It's probably not going to kill you, but it might kill your taste buds. We ate a lot of canned goods on this trip, but I also brought some jerky and hardtack, which is basically stale biscuits. Hardtack is so hard, it can double as a weapon. I even tried eating a mushroom that glowed in the dark, but that turned out to be a bad idea. If a mushroom looks cool, it probably is cool. Now, everyone always talks about how important guns are when you're out in the wilderness, and they're right. But half of all gun-related accidents are self-inflicted. And trust me, you don't want to be the guy who shoots himself in the junk. That being said, there's nothing more manly than shooting a gun. When you're out there, you feel like a real-life John Wick. But remember, guns are heavy. And if you're carrying a gun, you should probably be carrying a survival kit, extra ammo, a cleaning kit, and maybe even a second gun. But maybe the most important thing to remember about guns is that they're loud. And when you fire a gun, it attracts attention. And I'm not talking about animals. I'm talking about people. People will hear the gunshot and then they'll come looking for you. Sometimes that's a good thing, like when you meet friendly homesteaders who invite you to stay on their property and share their food. Other times it's not a good thing, like when you accidentally trespass on private land or worse, set off a minefield. The last thing I want to talk about is hygiene or lack thereof. Out there you will get dirty, like really, really dirty. You'll take off your shirt and see dirt for the first time in your life. The only way to clean yourself out there is to roll around in a stream or lake, preferably with 5 of your new best friends. After a while, you just kind of get used to smelling like wet leather in desperation. You won't bathe for weeks, maybe months. But hey, at least you won't have to worry about getting a yeast infection. So remember these 3 things: eat fast, sleep light, and shoot straight. And whatever you do, don't eat glowing mushrooms just because you're hungry. Howdy, partner. Need some advice on how to survive out west? To wit, you finally make it to a town. Great, now you just have to survive it. Western towns weren't the polished little places you see in cowboy movies. They were muddy, smelly, wooden disasters waiting for a match. Streets filled with horse poop, drunk cowboys, and the occasional toothless preacher yelling about doom. Let's take a walk down Main Street. On your left, the saloon. That's the local bar, casino, hotel, fight club, and sometimes hospital. Inside it smells like whiskey, sweat, and broken dreams. You can order a drink, but sip carefully. The whiskey might be moonshine mixed with snake venom and regret. On your right, the brothel. It looks classy on the outside, lace curtains and all. Inside, women doing what they have to in order to survive. You'd be surprised how many came out west chasing freedom and found themselves cleaning rooms and dodging creeps instead. Now, let's meet the sheriff. He might be a noble lawman, or just a dude with a badge and a drinking problem. Law and order? More like whoever draws first? Most crimes are solved with bullets, not justice. Bank? Sure, but don't put your money there unless you want it robbed next Tuesday. And don't even think about cheating at poker. The last guy who tried now haunts the outhouse behind the saloon. Seriously. Don't play cards unless you're ready to lose your hand or your hands. The moral of the story? Towns aren't safe havens. They're just the wild with walls. So you're thinking about heading into town, huh? Well, first things first, watch your horse. Tie him up in a spot where you can keep an eye on him, or he'll be gone faster than a coyote on a trail of roadkill. And whatever you do, don't get into a fight with a stranger. You don't know if he's packing. For every swinging saloon door, there's a whole heap of trouble waiting for you. And it ain't all in the mirror. In the Wild West, the law was as unpredictable as the weather. Sure, every town had a sheriff and a jail, but justice was a fickle thing. Sometimes it meant throwing the book at a guy, and sometimes it meant throwing the guy in the book. Law and order were more like suggestions than laws. It was a free-for-all, and only the quickest draw and surest aim could hope to stay on top. And then there were the outlaws. People come out west looking for gold or adventure or to escape their pasts. But when the pickings were slim, desperation drove some to do desperate things. So you might end up sharing a saloon with the very people you're trying to escape. Life in the Wild West was rough and tumble, like a riverboat gambler with a heart of gold and a 6-gun in his back pocket. It took a special kind of grit to survive, the kind that didn't mind getting down and dirty. In these parts, clean water was harder to find than a sober cowboy in a saloon. Houses were usually just one room with a dirt floor and a roof so you could dream of having 4 walls. If you were lucky, maybe you'd find a town with a schoolhouse and a church. But even those were often just wood and mortar with a whole lot of hope. There was no free health care in the West, and doctors were as rare as honest politicians. When the local dentist pulled a tooth, he'd use the same set of pliers on the next 10 customers without so much as a bite your leave. Medicine was mostly a matter of trial and error, and the local pharmacist was more likely to sell you snake oil than penicillin. But through it all, the people of the Wild West had a certain charm. There was a certain rugged individualism out here, a sense of freedom that drew people in from all over the world. And when the sun went down and the moon rose over the prairie, there was nowhere else you'd rather be. The Wild West was a place where anything could happen and everything was an adventure. It was a place where you could make your own rules and forge your own destiny. And despite all its hardships and dangers, it was a place where you could be truly free. Forget the Hollywood damsels. Real Wild West women were straight-up hardcore. They worked sunup to sundown, cooking, cleaning, birthing babies, running farms, patching wounds, and burying their husbands, and they did it all in corsets. If a man had to live one day in a woman's boots, he'd be crying before breakfast. Some became teachers, midwives, and homesteaders. Others were forced into brothels or married off before puberty, but many, many broke the mold. Like Calamity Jane, who could outdrink, outshoot, and outcuss most men, or Stagecoach Mary, a former slave who became a mail carrier armed and fearless. They had no vote, no legal protection, and no real power, yet they shaped the frontier. Many ran entire ranches solo. Some disguised themselves as men to work or fight. Others grabbed a shotgun and made their own rules. Hygiene was worse than awful. No pads, no deodorant, no plumbing. Menstrual rags were washed in rivers. Baths maybe once a month in a shared tub. Imagine doing all that work while covered in dust and blood and still being expected to look ladylike. So next time you think of a delicate pioneer woman sipping tea on a porch, think again. She's probably skinning a rabbit, loading a rifle, and cussing out the wind. There were 10 times more women in the West than in the East. In 1860, 10% of the U.S. population lived west of the Mississippi. Only 2% of those were women. A decade later, after the gold rush and westward expansion during the Civil War, 25% of the Western population was female. That's still only 1 in 4, but a huge increase from the eastern states where women made up half the population. Western women did all the traditional jobs, but sometimes they did them alone. When cholera and smallpox epidemics killed thousands of men in California during the 1850s, women stepped in to replace them. They kept the mines running, delivered the mail, and even fought in wars. But it wasn't easy being a woman in the Wild West. As the saying goes, when a woman's work is done, she's done. Women's work was never ending. There were jobs to be done around the house and on the ranch. They took care of the children, the livestock, the crops. They made clothes, they cooked meals, they cleaned, and they did it all without modern conveniences. No electricity, no indoor plumbing, no washing machine. Life was hard, but women were strong. They were used to hard work. They had no choice but to be self-sufficient. Women also had to deal with the dangers of the frontier. There were bears and mountain lions and snakes, not to mention the outlaws and the prospectors who would do anything to get their hands on a woman. But women were tough. They knew how to defend themselves. Many of them carried guns and knew how to use them. Some of them even fought in wars. But despite the hardships, women were an integral part of the Wild West. They were the backbone of the frontier. They made it possible for men to do their work by taking care of the home front. They also added a much-needed feminine touch to a very rough and tumble world. Now, I could tell you about some of the famous Wild West women, the ones who made it big. There were plenty of those. But I'd rather tell you about the ones who didn't make it into the history books, the ones who were just ordinary women doing extraordinary things. Take, for example, the women who ran ranches. When the men went out to work the fields or take care of the livestock, the women were left in charge. And they weren't just in charge of the housework, they were in charge of everything. They had to make sure the crops were planted on time, that the animals were fed, that the bills were paid. They had to deal with the cowboys and the hands, and they had to keep the ranch running smoothly. Then there were the women who disguised themselves as men so they could work or fight. This was a dangerous thing to do, since if you were caught, you could be hanged. But these women were desperate. They needed to work to survive, or they believed so strongly in the cause they were fighting for that they were willing to risk their lives. And then there were the women who simply made their own rules. They didn't have to be like the other women. They didn't have to be demure and ladylike. They could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. These women were the true pioneers, the ones who broke the mold. They were the ones who made the Wild West what it was. So the next time you hear someone say that the Wild West was a man's world, just shake your head and smile. You'll know that they're wrong. The Wild West was a woman's world too. It was a world where women could be anything they wanted to be, do anything they wanted to do. It was a world where women were free. Thank you for watching. See you next time. In the year of 1865, a man named Sam Bass made a living robbing stagecoaches. One day he found himself cornered by lawmen outside the jailhouse door in a small Texas town. With a bullet hole in his heart, he managed to drag himself into the bathroom, jumped into a bathtub, and died. As a result, the newspapers at the time described him as having gone out like a ramong. In reality, he looked more like a hog that had been killed for bacon. And in fact, that is pretty much how most folks died in the Wild West. I'm your host, and you're watching this channel. And today we're going to talk about how the Wild West was a dangerous place to live, especially if you were the kind of person who liked to stay alive. Of course, the first thing you have to understand is that death was always lurking in the Wild West. It was hiding behind every bush, waiting to pounce as you played poker with strangers, or it was in that stew that looked a little too good to be true. People died fast, and they died stupidly. Sometimes they even died while trying to avoid dying. The bottom line was that life in the Wild West was cheap. Now, when you think of the Wild West, you probably imagine two guys in matching outfits slowly circling each other and then drawing their guns and firing at the same time. But that's Hollywood nonsense. The truth was that gunfights were rare. When they did happen, they were messy, they were stupid, and they were usually pretty damn quick. Now, sometimes the shootings went on for a bit and took multiple casualties, but there were few rules and less etiquette. It was every man for himself, and no one was safe. The Old West saw its share of famous gunslingers, men like Wild Bill Hickok, Pat Subra, and Wyatt Earp, but they didn't go around dusting bad guys like they were Terminator 2 Judgment Day. In fact, most gunfights involved panic more than skill. People missed, they ran, they fell over, and very often they hit whatever was close by, which included themselves. But if dying by gun wasn't an option, there was always the land. It was the most valuable asset a homesteader or rancher could own, and it was hard to come by. There weren't exactly real estate agents handing out deeds in the Wild West, so squatters would set up shop and fight for their right to stay. Ranchers would hire gun hands to protect their herds, and it was a short step from there to outright robbery. Land disputes and cattle rustling were the bread and butter of frontier sheriffs, and at least it was honest work. Then there were the card sharps, the con men and the gamblers, people who cheated at every turn. Poker halls and saloons were places where men went to lose money and sometimes their lives. There were also accidents, plenty of them. Horses could bolt or buck. Stagecoach drivers had to contend with runaway wrecks. And doctors had a habit of cutting off the wrong limbs. Not to mention the sickness. You could go down with the fever for 10 days and die, or you could get dysentery and bleed out on the outhouse floor. Tuberculosis stalked the West like a ghost and claimed many victims. Frontier doctors were basically glorified field dressing stations. They amputated without anesthesia, rarely washed their hands, and prescribed whiskey as a cure for everything from bee stings to gunshot wounds. In fact, they probably killed more people than they saved, which is why medicinal whiskey was also known as death's sweet smile. But if you were lucky enough to survive all that, there was still rattlesnakes and wolves, bison stampedes and rabid dogs, bears looking for an early lunch, and flash floods that could sweep away an entire wagon train. Yeah, you got the idea. Life in the Wild West sucked. On top of all that, miners sometimes blew themselves up, which sounds like a fitting way to go, but it wasn't. Most miners didn't even die in the cave-ins or the explosions. They simply walked off into the wilderness and never came back. That's because gold mining was backbreaking work that paid very little. A man could earn $3 a day at the mines, but a saloon would pay $4 for cleaning tables. So a lot of miners just quit and went to work serving drinks. The point here is that the Wild West was a brutal place to live. And if you were adventurous enough to call it home, well, you probably didn't stay that way for long. It wasn't that people didn't love the Wild West. They did. They loved the wide open spaces, the chance to own land, the promise of gold and the adventure of it all. But they also knew that if they stayed too long, they might become another grim statistic, another cautionary tale around the campfire, another name on the list of the dead. But that didn't stop them. They fought, they suffered, they built towns and raised kids, and they chased freedom across the deadly plains. It's just the kind of reckless optimism that makes me want to move to the Wild West today. So, if you ever find yourself suddenly transported back to the Wild West, make sure to trust no one, bathe when you can, shoot only when needed, and never eat meat you didn't see killed. Also, don't play poker. Just don't ever play poker? Thanks for watching. The Wild West, a time and place where men were men, women were angels, and everyone else was dead. It was an untamed land full of opportunity, danger, and more guns than sense. And if you somehow survived the journey to get there, well, here's how to survive once you're actually in the Wild West. All right, partner. You've made it this far. You haven't been shot, scalped, bitten, robbed, or run over by a horse-drawn wagon. Impressive. Now let's talk about what not to do if you want to keep breathing. Rule number 1, don't get greedy. The fastest way to die in the Wild West? Gold fever. Everyone thought they'd strike it rich, buy a ranch, a saloon, and a badge, then ride off into the sunset with a briefcase full of gold. Spoiler, Most struck rocks, exhaustion, or each other with shovels, so stick to prospecting in your spare time. And when it comes to panning for gold, don't fall for every glint in the stream. You'll end up broke, half naked, and buried under a "here lies another idiot" tombstone. Rule number 2, don't trust the map. That shortcut through the mountains? It's a fast track to being coyote poop. Trails were unmarked, rivers moved, and maps were drawn by people who had no idea where they were, like right now. If someone says, "it's just over the hill," it probably means we're lost. Trust your eyes, nose, and instincts, not some dog-eared piece of paper. And if you need help, find a guide, not a cartographer. If you want to get where you're going without getting lost or dead, which you do, then hire a guide. Rule number 3, stay suspicious. That friendly man who offers you beans, shelter, and a smile could be a con artist or worse, a dentist. Keep your hand near your gun and your food near your face. Both could vanish quickly. A stranger might buy you a drink and tell you tall tales until you too drunk to remember his name, or that he slipped a gun in your ribs while you were telling your sob story. Strangers are nice, but don't be fooled by charm or kindness, because out here everyone has an angle. Even the sunshine. Rule number 4, respect native tribes. Hollywood lied. Not every Native American was hostile. Most just wanted settlers to stop ruining everything. And while you're at it, stop acting like the U.S. Army, because they're not here to protect you. They're here to steal your land. If you want to survive in the Wild West, you must understand one thing. If you can't buy, rent, steal, or kill it, you should probably respect it. Disrespect their land, lie, or trespass, and you're asking for a lesson you won't survive to remember. Rule number 5, never say "it can't get worse," because it can. Rain floods your camp, a horse kicks you in the chest, your wagon wheel snaps, and suddenly you're eating boiled boots. The Wild West is a fixer-upper of a place, and it's gonna take all your energy to fix it. So stay humble, stay alert, and keep your socks dry, if you even have socks. And finally, rule number 6, laugh or die. The Wild West was brutal, filthy, and unfair, and the only way to deal with it was to laugh. If you can't laugh at your awful situation, you won't make it. So tip your hat, tighten your boots, and ride into that dusty sunset, preferably with a loaded revolver and a full canteen. The West doesn't care if you're brave. It just wants to know if you're useful, and if you're not, well, there's always room in Boot Hill.